The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Financial Rebellion. This is Carolyn Betts and Catherine Austin Fitz, and we already miss Polly, don't we?
Yes.
Anyway, Polly is off, very busy working for bringing news about children and what we can do to protect them. But we have a great show and a great guest for you today, and we're very excited. We have a lot to talk about. This is someone who is in the front lines doing amazing things for both financial freedom and health freedom. I dare say, I don't think she ever imagined that she would end up with a career doing exactly what she's doing now, but she's really rocking the world. So with no further ado, I want to invite in someone who runs the state initiatives for the Solari Report and also is in the lead for Weston Price and food freedom. So she's right at the heart of integrating financial freedom and food freedom. Elizabeth Murphy, welcome.
Well, thank you for such a kind introduction, Catherine. I'm happy to be here.
So you're coming in from Tennessee. You're also a fellow Tennessean, and you have represented Solari for several years, both in Tennessee, but now you're helping us with our state initiatives, and we'll talk about that. But you're also right at the heart of working on food for Weston Price, and you've integrated with lots of people in the network of Children's Health Defense. We've got people throughout the country in all three organizations who are fighting for food freedom. So you have dealt with any, and you just came back from a very exciting legislative battle in North Carolina that we're going to talk about. But let's start. I want everybody to get to know you and your journey, because we want people to get to know their state representatives and get into the action of really determining our future by working with real legislation in the state legislature. So we have a brochure that you helped author called Working Successfully with State Leaders Who Will Take Responsibility. But I want to start with your journey, because I dare say once upon a time, you never thought you would end up being one of the leaders in the country on navigating state legislators back to freedom. I dare say that was not anything you expected to do.
No, not at all.
So take us back to the pandemic and your journey with raw milk, and explain how you got into all of this.
So sure. So I was raised by a dad who saw very early on the damage vaccines were doing, and he stopped vaccinating my sister and I when I was around 7 or 8. And so all through high school and college, I understood the damage vaccines could do and was very vocal as a young person about that. In 2015, I moved to West Virginia for work. And while in West Virginia at that time, West Virginia was one of 2 states that did not have religious vaccine exemptions. It was West Virginia and Mississippi. California hadn't fallen yet. And so while in West Virginia, I just got very upset by the fact that children could not go to school. There was no religious or philosophical exemptions, and there was no doctor in the state who was brave enough to write a medical exemption. And so there was an amazing group of parents who had been fighting for years in West Virginia trying to get the law changed. And by 2015, a lot of them had moved out of state and just, gotten weary of the fight. And so one day I just went into the Facebook group that they had, and I just put up a little post and I said, hey, does anyone want to get this started again? And within about 5 minutes, a vaccine-injured pharmacist named Chanda reached out to me, and we just started a new little group, and it was sort of divinely orchestrated. It grew very quickly. We had some amazing people join, Dr. Alvin Moss and his wife, Marlene. And so we worked for a few years. They're still working, but I worked with them for a few years on getting the legislation changed. And we got very, very close in the spring of 2017. We actually had made it through, if my memory serves, I think 3 committees. And we were in the final committee was going to be the Senate Health Committee, who was chaired by a doctor named Tom Takubo. And he actually told us that he was not going to put the bill on his committee's agenda. thus killing the bill. And around that same time, I moved back to Tennessee. Never intended to get involved legislatively, but a senator in my part of the state introduced a bill to ban raw milk herd share agreements. And so I called him up. And once again, I was just a citizen. I had no background in any of this. What I learned in West Virginia was you just show up and you start talking to people, and you kind of just figure it out. And so in Tennessee, I hadn't planned to get involved until this bill was introduced on raw milk. And when I called up the senator who had introduced it, I mentioned how I just moved back from West Virginia. And he said, "Oh, West Virginia, I love their mandatory vaccination policy." And so at that point, I was like, "Oh, okay, Tennessee's not as safe as I thought." So I just started going to Nashville, got to know former Senator Frank Nicely really well, worked with him, and the Tennessee Coalition for Vaccine Choice was who I was working with at the time. And we were just a group of citizens who just showed up and just talked to people. And you realize kind of quickly who your allies are, and you just kind of learn on the go. And so when 2020 happened in my home county, I live in Knox County, Tennessee. I woke up one day in July, and suddenly our Board of Health, which is different than the Department of Health, our Board of Health had issued a mask mandate and a curfew and a maximum, I guess, I can't think of it, like how many people could enter a restaurant. There was it was reduced to how many people could enter a restaurant. And so I was just baffled by how an unelected board could make mandates, could make law. That's just not constitutional. And so once again, I just started a Facebook group, didn't really intend to do much with it. I just thought it could be a place where we all just kind of complained. Very quickly, some brilliant minds joined that Facebook group. And one of the lawyers who joined realized that while our county commission did not have the authority to disband the Board of Health. They could disband the Board of Health, but they couldn't control what the Board of Health did. And so we lobbied the county commission for about 6 months. We had 400 to 500 people showing up for county commission meetings. And ultimately, at the end of about 6 months, they did finally vote to disband the Board of Health, and all the mandates went away. So that was our first big win at a county level. And then from there, we just continued to work at a state level. I met you in, I think, fall of 2022, and then got hired on to lobby for Solari and Weston Price, legislative cycle 2023. So
for Solari, you're working on financial transaction freedom. For Weston Price, you're working on food freedom. And as we all believe, it's really one issue.
yeah,
Because you can't control the money unless you control the food, and you can't control the food unless you control the money. So it's been interesting to watch you dive into all the detail on both topics, because you can, a lot of times by committee or discussion, they're kept separate, but at some point you see how they dovetail. So I know raw milk is one of your passions, and it's one of our passions at Solari, because the host of our food series, Pete Kennedy, has been lobbying on raw milk for years and years and years. And anyway, but our term of the day is raw milk. So I wanted to just get Carolyn to jump in and define raw milk. That's the term of the day. So Carolyn, take us away.
Hey, yeah, my understanding, I can't tell you all the details of homogenization and pasteurization, but I know that raw milk, which is milk that's not pasteurized or homogenized, it comes straight from the cow, is much more nutritious, and frankly, it tastes better too. So I've been drinking raw milk, but the reason I selected this as the term for the day is that it's a good example of how grassroots people have gotten laws enacted in various forms, and I'll let Elizabeth explain that, various forms to allow people to have raw milk, and how you can get things passed at the state level, and then they're at issue later on, and there are lobbyists who are submitting bills to retract it. So Elizabeth, take it away and tell us about what you know about the raw milk legislation at the state level.
Sure. So one just sort of takeaway on, why is raw milk so much better than for the body than pasteurized milk? When you pasteurize milk, you heat it to the point that it destroys the enzymes and the carrier proteins that are needed by the body to absorb calcium, folate, B12, B6, vitamin A and D, and the other minerals. And so in order to absorb those nutrients, when you're drinking the pasteurized milk, the body actually has to produce those enzymes, and that can take a lot of energy, especially in the amounts to require like 100% assimilation. And then also there's, when you're drinking raw milk, you're drinking milk, usually you're drinking it from one cow, in some case, maybe a handful of cows. But when you're drinking pasteurized milk, this is milk from, at times, maybe hundreds of cows that has gone into a huge vat. Though there's a lot of chemicals that have to keep those vats clean, and the milk is transported from one place to another. Sometimes it heats up too high, they have to cool it back down. And so by the end result, what you're drinking is really not real milk. I like to call raw milk real milk, because it is, in fact, what for millennia humans have been drinking. Pasteurization is a very new thing. And actually, if you start digging into the Podger cat studies and how pasteurized milk affects cats, it shows that it actually can cause a lot of damage. So at a state level, most states have two ways that you can get raw milk. You can either get raw milk via herd share, which is where you go to a farmer and you purchase for usually a pretty nominal amount, $30, $50, a portion of the herd. And so at that point, you're now a partial owner of the herd. And then you can purchase the milk from the farmer. You can also purchase milk as pet milk, which is, not for human consumption. You're buying it for pets. And right now what's happening in North Carolina is initially, last week we got word on Friday that the North Carolina Farm Act, which originated in the Senate, had language in it that would have done away with raw milk herd share agreements. It also has Section 19, which is the pesticide immunity portion, which we can get into later if we want. And so we rallied all of the dairymen and women in North Carolina, and they were amazing. They were calling, they were emailing. We showed up. There was probably 100 of us at the Capitol in Raleigh on Tuesday. And in the Senate Judiciary Committee, they actually amended out the piece that would have done away with the raw milk herd share agreements. But unfortunately, they slipped in committee. We didn't know ahead of time that this amendment existed. They slipped in an amendment that would do away being able to sell raw milk as pet milk. And so this would affect a lot of people in North Carolina, because most raw milk producers do both. They do herd share and pet milk, because during the year milk levels fluctuate. They know that, they can supply X amount of people with a gallon or half gallon of milk a week, but some weeks they might have more. And in that case, that milk would just go to waste. So pet milk allows people to purchase the raw milk for their pets. And it also allows the raw milk producer to have better value for them and not having milk go to waste. And so we're hoping that we can get that changed. If you want to follow along, Weston Price will be sending out alerts. You can sign up for our email list, and we'll be pushing back against that moving forward. So
let's talk about the legislative process, including how you got to understand it. So if you want to bring about real change in this world, you have to deal with a legislative process that creates laws and in some cases approves regulations. So what happens in terms of allocation of resources or making up of rules is really determined at a legislative level for most things. And getting to know your state and federal representatives, but in this case, we're talking about state. Getting to know your state representatives also means understanding the jurisdiction you're in and what the legislative and committee process is for your jurisdiction. So tell us a little bit about how you figured that all out.
Well, when I started working in West Virginia, which no one was paying me. I was just walking over to the Capitol. I lived very close. I was in, I could be there in literally 1 minute from my house. So it was easy for me to show up. I didn't know anything. At the time, I probably would have called myself an anarchist. Like I'd never even registered to vote. I was under the assumption that all politicians were corrupt. There was no point in being part of the system. I didn't want to be part of the machine. But then when I moved to West Virginia and I realized that this law was on the books, there was a compulsion in me that maybe we could get it changed. Maybe I was wrong. And what I realized was I was in fact very, very wrong. And within about a week of showing up at the Capitol and just walking the halls and talking to people, me and a woman named Lori Jones, who's an amazing woman in West Virginia, an autism mom, she and I were walking down the house hallway one day, and a group of House members literally pulled us into their office, shut the door. And it was a very secretive meeting. They're like, we're with you. We need to get this changed. And they became really good friends. I'm still good friends with a few of them to this day. And it just shifted my perspective, like, oh, these are just regular people. They actually aren't all bought. They're not all corrupt. They don't all have control files. There's actually a lot of good men and women in the state legislatures. And so in terms of where to begin, if you're brand new to this, I would look up and see who your senator is, who your representative is, or your delegate is what they would call it in West Virginia, and ask them. Most legislative sessions end around now. Some go year round, but this would be a good time to begin to get to know your representative and senator. And so I would just email them or call their office and say, hey, I'm your constituent. I would love to meet up with you for coffee in district. And just like with anyone that you're meeting for the first time, just kind of go in friendly. Don't have an ask. Just say, hey, how can I help you? You know, like I saw, go through their bill list. You can always find all the bills that they sponsored on the websites, and maybe just go through their bill list, find a bill that you think is interesting. Hopefully there is one, and go in wanting to talk about that. And then in the second or third meeting, then you can begin to educate, and you're just forming a friendship, because a lot of these legislators are so overwhelmed with information
Right.
needs by the community, that if you can present yourself as like, hey, I'm someone who really understands food, or I'm someone who really understands the financial sector and what we can do, you just kind of start there.
Elizabeth, I have a question. Excuse me.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
Let's say that your legislator is not one that's on board with the things that you're interested in, and that there are key people who are in other districts. What's your experience with? I assume that you had the nerve to go talk to people who were not your representatives, but how open were they to meet with you and listen to you? And then what is there? How do you decide whether your own legislator is movable or not?
Well, I think it's different probably in every state and every experience. You know, I think at this point, most states have a health freedom group. And so you could always reach out to that health freedom group and say, hey, I want to get involved. We have Weston Price chapter leaders who may, in every state, who may know information about who the senators or reps are who are already kind of aware of our cause. But if your personal representative or senator is not necessarily friendly, then I think the first step would be to ascertain why they're not friendly. Is it lack of education? And if so, how can you help to educate them on, you know, case in point, and what we're seeing in North Carolina is that, you know, the Department of Agriculture, Farm Bureau, the North Carolina Dairymen Association, they're all really perpetuating this myth that raw milk is so dangerous, while we at Weston Price are able to present them with information that shows, well, actually, from 2005 to 2020, 4 people died from pasteurized milk having issues. 1 person died from raw milk. 20-something people died from leafy grains. And so sometimes it's just really a lack of education. They are just normal people. These are normal business women and men and women. They don't necessarily have the time to deep dive and research. And so once again, if you can present yourself as a tool to help educate, I think that's great. But in terms of, okay.
Are you saying that you go to the state agencies also that are involved in the issues
Well,
trying
since
to
I'm a lobbyist, I do like to go to the agencies just because that's who you're going to be working with closely. As a layperson, it might be hard to get in, you know, with your commissioner of agriculture in your state. And I'm not even sure that would be super effective. I think the most effective way to use your time is to meet with your own personal rep and senator. And then at that point, if they're not going to be an ally, if you determine, okay, this is not going to be someone that I can shift their perspective on, then at that point, I would just start, you know, looking through you can read all the bills that are filed in your state. And there's in Tennessee, thousands of bills. And I would just sort of read through those bills, see who sponsored a bill that you like, and say, oh, this person sponsored a great health freedom bill. They're probably an ally. I need to get a meeting with them and present myself as a person who can help them in the next legislative cycle. Because a lot of
So Elizabeth, let me just interrupt.
Yeah.
Explain how you came to understand the committee system, because I think part of, you know, after you get to know your representatives, you want to understand the committee system in the state and what committees have jurisdiction of what, and then where the people that you're in cahoots with, whether it's their representatives or other people you've established a relationship, who's on what committee and what goes through what committee. Explain that.
Well, since we were talking about raw milk, we can start there. if raw milk is a passion of yours and you wanted to get involved in protecting raw milk access in your state, at this point, most states have some form of way to get raw milk. And so something you could do as a consumer is you could begin to make appointments with everybody on the House or Senate Agriculture Committee, because that's, of course, where all the raw milk legislation would go through. And so at that point, you look up the committee list on your state legislative website. And if it's, if legislative session is in session, sometimes it's really hard to get a lot of meetings unless it's about a specific bill that already exists. But in the legislative off season, which is usually around now in most states, this would be a great time just to begin meeting with members of the House Agriculture Committee if raw milk was something you wanted to get involved with. And all you could just show up and say, hey, what do you know about raw milk? What is the data that you understand at this point? And then you can kind of understand, what they may or may not know and offer that up. So in most states, how a bill works, if you as a citizen wanted to work with your legislator on a bill, it's really quite simple. You would go to your rep or your senator. In Tennessee, you have to have both a Senate sponsor and a House sponsor. It's not that way in every state. Some states, a bill can originate in either house and then it'll cross over to the other legislative body. And so you only have that one bill. But in Tennessee, you would have two companion bills. So you would have the House version and the Senate version, meaning that you would need to have a House sponsor and a Senate sponsor. And if you went to your House member, your House representative, and they said no, then at that point you would have to begin to think, okay, who would make sense to carry this bill in my state? And if it's a raw milk bill, then of course somebody on the Ag Committee would be where to start, because that's possibly their background and they would be on the committee that the bill would go through. So in Tennessee, if you had a bill idea, you would go to your House member and say, hey, would you want to do this? If they say yes, you say great, then you have to find a senator. When you find a senator that wants to do it, at that point, they would take your bill language. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's literally just like, here's my bill idea. Here's the model language as I know it. They would send it to what's called legislative services, which is attorneys that work for the state legislature. And they would draft that language into the proper format, like what sections of code it would open, what would be changed. And then at that point, the bill is referred to committees in the House and the Senate, and that's done by the legislative clerk. And so bills can run in Tennessee. I'm speaking to Tennessee because that's the legislative system I'm most familiar with. But in Tennessee, a bill can run simultaneously in the House and the Senate. And so in case of a raw milk bill, that would have to first go through the House Agriculture Subcommittee, which is a smaller committee. And then if it makes it out of the Agriculture Subcommittee, it would then go to the House Agriculture Full Committee. On the Senate side, there is only one Agriculture Committee, and that's usually how it is in most states, because the House is going to have a lot more members than the Senate. And so the House, at least in the states that I've worked in, has more committees. And so at that point, once it passes out of all of the committees it's referred to, it then goes to the House floor for a vote, which is every member of the House has to vote on it on the House floor. And then the same thing, it goes on to the Senate floor for a vote, and then it's transferred to the governor for him to sign. So that's a
one of the things that makes the process easier is if similar legislation has been passed in other states and you have model language that can be adapted for that state. I see state legislators draw great comfort when they've seen other states do it first and sort of work out the issues and then work out the language, and that makes the process easier. One thing I wanted to mention is one thing that makes the process harder is something called a fiscal note. So tell us about fiscal notes.
So in Tennessee, if a bill has a fiscal note, which is when the bill is going to cost the state of Tennessee money, that is going to be hard because that means that money will have to be allocated in the budget. And unless the governor has taken an interest in the issue and specifically allocated the money in his budget, then your chances of getting that bill passed are drastically reduced. Case in point, we at Solari had a bill this past session that would have taken the tax off in-person cash transactions of $20 or less. And that had a high fiscal note because that would have cost the state money in tax revenue. And so we knew the bill wasn't going to pass because of the fiscal note. We thought it was still worthwhile to push it to start the conversation. But unfortunately, it was never going to pass because it was going to cost the state money, and that money had not been allocated into the budget. So.
Right. So if you can come up with a first step on legislation, and we've seen, Senator Nicely is was hero of the year before on the Solari report. He would spend as many as 7 years getting something passed, but he just kind of, he'd kind of turtle his way through. And so if you can come up with a first step that doesn't have a fiscal note, you start, you get the nose under the tent, so to speak. So,
For sure. And one of the bills that I believe that we're going to run next year, we had it in a bigger bill this year in Tennessee, is just making gold and silver legal tender in your state. There's many states that have already done this. And I believe in the show notes, we'll have there it is. We'll, uh, we'll have the link to that, I believe, in the show notes. But this is just a model piece that shows, you could take this to your state rep, your state senator, and say, hey, if your state doesn't have gold and silver as legal tender, this is an easy way to, get this done. That bill will have no fiscal note. Many states have already done it, like Catherine mentioned. And if many states have already done something, then your state's going to be like, oh, this must be a good idea. They've already done this in so many states. We should join them.
so you worked with us for 2 years while you were educating the Solari team on the state legislative process, and we finally were able to put together and publish a great wrap up that showed all the different things the states can do. And it was a major writing project for you and Carolyn. And it just shows all the different actions that states can do in the financial area as well as related areas, including food, Second Amendment, First Amendment, to protect financial freedom. And it's a major piece of work. I had the opportunity to sit down and brief an entire leadership team, almost everybody in one particular state. And we had copies of it, and I just walked them through, and they're like, oh my God, wow, this is the blueprint. So, and that's available in PDF form up on the website, what the states can do. But also, Lou, do you have the wrap up? I don't know if you
This
have
is the
that.
Solari website.
Yeah, at the Solari website. So it's a wealth of information, and in the process of identifying all the different legislation or actions that a state could do, Elizabeth, you and the team at Solari who works on this went and looked at what all the other states were doing. Maybe if you can say, what did you learn from that process?
Well, I learned that there's people working in so many states. It was definitely really inspiring to see just how much has been done and just all the different great ideas. And the states have so much power. I think a lot of us, we're not taught in school how to get involved legislatively in our own legislatures. And of course, the news is going to cover what's happening in DC and the presidential race and the federal stuff, and that is important. But we as citizens really don't have a way to shift the needle in DC. It's too big. But here in our own states, we really do. We can protect freedoms. We can also broaden freedoms. And so if there's something in your state that you think is wrong, I really hope that you can, take the step forward just to begin meeting with your legislators, because we have so much control at a state level. And I just don't know that people understand how much a state can actually do. And that's what was really inspiring to me as we were putting that piece together, being like, oh, wow, look at all these things that states have actually done.
And we met great allies. So I'm thinking now of there's a group of conservative AGs and conservative treasurers who've done amazing things, working with their state legislators. But one of the amazing treasurers we met was Marlo Oaks in Utah. And he's got great staff. And that's just an amazing group. And they led the effort to stop the natural asset companies, which we covered here on Financial Rebellion. And what's interesting is one of the representatives you work very closely with asked us if Carolyn and I would write a bill to outlaw NACs in Tennessee. And so we did. And Carolyn did an amazing job, because one of the things she crafted was outlawing natural asset companies as not only not permitted to operate in the state, but being banned from purchase by the state pension funds and rainy day funds and, all the state money. And when we finally finished it and it was drafted for Tennessee, we shared it with Marlo, who shared it with all the other treasurers. And it was a perfect example on that effort. The SEC finally pulled an axe and said uncle. But it was a perfect example of people in Congress, in the state legislators, in the treasurers, in the AGs working together. And it just kind of exploded. And when Marlowe started the effort, I would have said, best he's got a 10% shot at stopping this. And by the time it sort of exploded in momentum, the SEC just said uncle and pulled the whole thing. And it was an example of this kind of just kind of out of control networking of people working together for freedom. And the
Yeah.
pushback was amazing.
I agree. That was one of the most beautifully orchestrated, just sort of takedowns of an agenda that seemed almost too big to fail, but it did in fact fail because individuals did take action. So I think that was one of
Right.
our biggest success stories last year.
Right. So many people took action. And when they realized, part of it was just realizing how bad it was.
Mhm.
And, I said to you last year, we tried to get many good things done, but we had to spend a lot of time stopping bad things. And I always cried during, when everybody's spending time watching the presidential campaign, but meantime, the bad guys are showing up and getting all these horrible things through the state legislators that are going to, ruin our lives and control us. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think one thing to take away too is how important it is to call an email, because a lot of these legislators, they do know what's happening is wrong, but they need someone not to necessarily blame, but they need someone to point to. They need to say, hey, my constituency really doesn't want this, so I can't vote for this. Because a lot of times the bills that are the bad bills are being carried by people who are in very influential places within the state legislature, who the individual, sometimes very new, younger legislators don't want to go against. So we as the public have to give them kind of a scapegoat, like, hey guys, I can't vote for
Right.
this. My constituency really doesn't like it. So we have to take ownership as a citizen in helping our legislators do what's right. And it's as simple as calling and emailing. One thing to know is that there's a lot of very well-intentioned organizations who use wonderfully orchestrated websites where you can go fill out your information and it sends a form email. Don't do that. In Tennessee, the legislative assistants have a program within their Microsoft Outlook, and I've had legislative assistants tell me this, that if they get those sort of form emails, even if the email itself is a little changed, if it's going through one of those websites, the Microsoft Outlook program will actually just put it into a junk folder. And then just now in North Carolina, a few days ago, a Senate assistant told me the same thing. She said that any email that comes in that's through one of those sort of like click and send website pages, they automatically delete them. So it needs to be personal emails from your personal email address, and that's going to have the most impact. And of course, in-person meetings, if you're able to show up in person, that is 1,000 times more effective than calling or emailing.
I have to tell you a story. When I was Assistant Secretary of Housing in Washington, I got a call from a congressman's office that said we're getting, a sudden increase in contacts from constituents on housing. Can you come over and talk to us? We need to jump on this. And I thought, okay. And I went over and I said, what's the increase? And they said, well, we never get letters on housing, but last week we got 2 personally written letters. And I thought, really? 2? But they thought that was, and so, even if it's handwritten, a personal contact where you spend the time makes a big difference, and they take it seriously. We had,
Catherine,
yeah.
sorry, I wanted to share this story, and you could share it if you want, about what happened in Tennessee with the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve Bill, and the legislator that shared with us some of the correspondence he had received. And I guess they didn't do this Microsoft thing that Elizabeth says that they're able to exclude, but there was clearly an out-of-state lobbying effort, and there were letters that you could see phrases that were verbatim, and apparently they had like select one of four reasons that, and so some of the letters had one, some of them had another, but some of them, there were a lot of those letters. Catherine, you want to explain some of the details of that?
So this is really funny because this is what happened at Catherine's birthday. So, my birthday is the day before Christmas. And the great thing about having your birthday the day before Christmas is you get to take the day off, and you get to go shopping, you get to anyway. So Elizabeth forwarded some of these emails and the lies were so outrageous. I was furious. And I knew that the representative, it's a wonderful representative, he needed real hard evidence to say no to this. And, essentially my position was if you have enough money as a state to buy Bitcoin, you have enough money to lower taxes and, and to take the sales tax off of cash purchases. So I sat down, I took a deep breath and I said, I'm going to do this. And I spent all day, I think I read them on, I think it was December 23rd. I spent all day on my birthday, December 24th, and all day on Christmas. I was back in Tennessee because we had a teammate who had family problems and I wanted to be there. And so I spent all my birthday and all Christmas just researching and organizing and writing Bitcoin bailout because I said, you are not going to come in and destroy our fiscal soundness in Tennessee with this crap. And put together something that was short and sweet, but that a state legislator could read and use to spin back. And I think Elizabeth, certainly in terms of presenting the material, it helped.
Definitely. Yeah,
Right.
definitely.
Right. So let's talk a little bit what we try and do, whether it's model legislations or briefing materials, we try and once a month we have legislative briefings that Elizabeth is organizing and leading. So tell us a little bit about what we're doing at Solari to make these kinds of issues more understandable to state legislators.
Sure. So I can't even remember how we decided to do this, but I think at some point we realized that, we have so many legislators across the country that we have connected with who are amazing, and they just sometimes need a little bit of a deeper dive into a topic. And so once a month, we pick a topic that we're going to do, and we invite. Usually it's just state legislators, county commissioners, city council, any elected official. This month, our next meeting is actually tomorrow. And then I think through the summer, we've decided to actually open it up to everyone, to lay people. And so I feel like one of the more impactful ones we did was on constitutional conventions, the ConCon. We had a wonderful man from the John Birch Society, Joel Overton. Do I have his name right?
Wolverton, Joe Wolverton. It was fabulous.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, he was fabulous. And because I think a lot of, especially conservative legislators, really think that constitutional convention could be a good thing, and they don't understand the dangers to potentially, well, not even potentially, the definite dangers of opening up something like that. And so all of these monthly Zooms are recorded. We have them up on the website, and we just, encourage people to access them and send them out if you ever hear of anyone talking about one of the topics that we've covered. So.
Right. And they can sign up. You put out an update weekly on financial transaction freedom, including on the state initiatives.
Yes.
So tell us how we sign up for that.
So if you go to, let's see, I'm going to pull up the website right now because you think I'd remember the URL. If you go to financial ft2freedom.solari.com, you can go there and you can sign up for the newsletters, and we'll get you plugged in and all the information about the monthly Zooms once you're signed up for the newsletter. So that's FT2, the numeral 2, freedom.solari.com.
Right. And you can link to it from solari.com. And it also has links to several really great resources. One is a podcast called Over the Mountain.
Yes, it is. So former Senator Frank Nicely, once he was out of office, we just thought Frank's knowledge needed to continue to be shared with as many people as possible. And so he now has a podcast called Over the Mountain. And if you have Spotify, you can listen on Spotify. You just search Over the Mountain, Frank Nicely, to find it. And then we also have it linked on the Financial Transaction Freedom website. and Solari. And so the next episode that should be coming out in the next few weeks is on conservation easements and why those are actually not a good idea for a farmer to sign up into one.
Right. Anyway, so you can also, again, if you go to Solari or to the Freedom website, you can access and get all these resources. And we try and make everything accessible, as soon as it's ready, so that you have all of these as resources to help you do this. Okay, so let's turn. We've been both as a team in terms of discussion, but your work. We've been dealing with a legislative situation that's happening across the country on a particularly irritating legislative effort by the pesticide makers, who feel that we're not poisoning our children enough. We need to be doing more. And they have legislation asking for corporate indemnification for pesticide makers. And this was a bill that got stopped in Tennessee at the last minute, but it is now popped up in North Carolina as well as other states. And you were just over in North Carolina helping the group there. The people in Tennessee who've been working to stop this have spent months. And so there's an accumulation of knowledge and understanding, and hopefully you are going over to transfer that to Tennessee. And, children's health defense is about children's health. And this is a critical issue for children's health. So tell us what this legislation is and why it's one of the things you've been battling.
So I'm going to speak specifically to the bill we stopped in Tennessee because I understand the nuance of it the most. Every bill that's being pushed by Bayer in every state, at the core of it is the same, but they're all a slight different. So in Tennessee, what happened was we began to see these ads from an organization called the Modern Ag Alliance. They were running Facebook ads, Instagram ads, they had billboards. And what we realized was Modern Ag Alliance was a front for Bayer. And so what these ads were saying was, we need to protect glyphosate. We need to help the farmers by basically giving Bayer immunity. So Bayer has come in and they're working in tandem with Farm Bureau on this, unfortunately. And they're saying that due to the frivolous lawsuits over glyphosate, they need to be given immunity based on the label. So how it works is a pesticide manufacturer, and once again, I helped on this bill in Tennessee, but there was amazing people who worked on this much longer than me. So I'm going to give my understanding, and if I get anything wrong, I apologize. But what Bayer is saying is that if they are not given immunity based on the label, the warning label, then they are going to pull their product off the market in Tennessee. This is what they were telling farmers. And so how it works is a pesticide manufacturer has testing done or does internal testing. They determine what known issues their product could have, what health risks. They go to the EPA, they tell the EPA what needs to be put on the warning label, and the EPA puts it on the warning label. The manufacturer then has the product go to market. And so in regards to glyphosate, they did not put on the label that it could potentially cause non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And so when the lawsuits began rolling out, because Bayer bought Monsanto, so Monsanto was the original manufacturer of the glyphosate. And so when the lawsuits began rolling out, how did the people sue? Well, they sued on failure to warn based on the label. And since Bayer and Monsanto had not put on the label that their product could potentially cause this thing, that is what the failure to warn lawsuits were using as the mechanism to sue. And so in Tennessee, what the sponsors of the bill were saying was that it's really the EPA's job to make sure that the label is accurate and that it's not the pesticide manufacturer's job. Well, the EPA does not have an internal mechanism that allows them to determine whether the label that is provided to them by the manufacturer is in fact accurate. And so it was sort of this catch-22 where it's like, the legislators were being told that it was the EPA's fault, but the EPA doesn't actually have a way to determine if fraud is being done. The failure to warn lawsuits is how the discovery process works. And so through the discovery process, you're able to determine whether the manufacturer actually knew ahead of time that their product could cause one of these issues. And one of the reasons that you're seeing such large payouts in these lawsuits against Bayer and Monsanto is because the juries become so infuriated when it becomes known through the discovery process that this product could in fact cause this. That's my understanding. If I got anything wrong, I apologize. I'm not an attorney. but we were able to stop it in Tennessee in the Judiciary Committee. So this bill had passed out of House Ag Sub, House Ag Full, it passed out of Senate Ag, it passed out of Senate Judiciary. It was only stopped in the House Judiciary Committee, which was really amazing. I mean, to make it through that many committees and be stopped. And it wasn't fully stopped. They have paused it until next year. And one of the reasons that it was stopped was an amazing molecular toxicologist named Dr. Alexandra Munoz showed up out of nowhere from Florida. She had gotten wind in January that Bayer was going to be pushing this same piece of legislation in multiple states. And so she basically devoted herself to stopping it. And she's not being funded by anyone. She's completely independent. And I highly recommend following her on Instagram because she's sharing in real-time data on everything that's happening.
Elizabeth, can you just give her name and spell it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So her Instagram handle is dr.alexandra, ALEXANDRA Munoz, MUNOZ. And so she's wonderful, really, really savvy. And she was really, I think, critical in stopping it in Tennessee. And now she's working in North Carolina. So this bill has unfortunately passed in Georgia. The governor of Georgia has not signed it. I know that there's a push to get him to veto it. The bill was stopped for this session in Florida. Unfortunately, North Dakota did pass it. Iowa has stopped the same bill for 2 years. And one of the things that, Farm Bureau and Bayer are saying is that they're doing this for the farmers, that if Bayer is not given this immunity, then the price of the glyphosate is going to continue to rise, and that will impact farmers. And the thing that's happening, though, is that it's not farmers that are suing about the product causing harm. It's the citizens. And Bayer has already removed glyphosate from the home use product. If you were to go to Lowe's or Home Depot now and buy Roundup, it no longer contains glyphosate in it. And so they've already drastically reduced their legal liability by removing it from the home use product, because what we were seeing was consumers, as you can see on the image, this man is spraying and he doesn't have protective gear on his arms. He's potentially getting it on his skin, and that person does have on protective gear. And so a home use user was just spraying it on their yard. They had no idea that they should be worried about anything. Because the label did not give them that warning. And so since Bayer has already pulled the glyphosate out of the home use line of products, their liability has already gone way down. Because when a farmer is spraying it on the field, often they do have on protective gear. If they're doing it by hand, they're often not doing it by hand. They're using machines that are spraying, and they're not actually coming into contact. The other thing that's not being said about this liability bill is it's not going to be just Bayer. In Tennessee, and I know in North Carolina, it would have been giving the same immunity based on the label to every registered pesticide in our state. And so, any pesticide manufacturer that had registered through our North Carolina or Tennessee Department of Ag would be given the same immunity. And we have companies like ChemChina who would be given the same immunity. And I don't necessarily know that we should be given, foreign nations the opportunity to harm us and not be held liable. So
I want to come back to money, because one of the things that's been interesting as I've talked with people about, so certainly in the health area, we know what happens when you give corporations indemnification. So we gave vaccine makers essentially indemnification, and we know what happened next. So we know, there's a track record of what happens when a corporation is essentially free to poison people and or not to worry about what the health ramifications are. Now, here is what is so unbelievably frustrating to me. Let's talk money. At the federal level, our annual military budget is approximately $857 billion a year. Secretary Hegseth wants to take that to $1 trillion a year. Our healthcare budget is $1.8 trillion. So almost double the military budget. And the reason it's almost double the military budget is America's being poisoned. And if you look at the poisoning techniques we're using, that is starting to be, there's a real effort to export that around the world. If you dig into those numbers, what you will find, Dr. Mark Skidmore just did an analysis that showed if we went back to 2010 levels of disability, we would save $500 billion. We would drop that HHS budget from 1.8 to 1.3 trillion. So we are literally looking at the bankruptcy of the federal government. Now let's go to the states. If you talk to most states, what you will discover is they have done relatively, for example, Tennessee, a very good job of accruing their state pension fund liabilities in terms of the retirement benefits. But very rarely has a state funded and accrued funding for their healthcare liabilities. And what we are watching both at the federal and state level is an explosion of healthcare expenses. Now, what I find ridiculous is that a state could be contemplating giving basically indemnification to pesticide makers, given what that is doing to create chronic illness and ill health and basically poisoning people. I'm amazed the health officer isn't down at the legislature saying, wait a minute, we can't afford to give these guys pesticide because this is going to show up in our healthcare costs. This is going to show up in our productivity numbers. This is going to show up as people get sick. They are less able to build the kind of businesses and infrastructure we need. You know, we can't afford to keep, anyway, the poisoning of America is the bankrupting of America. And and it's not just at the federal and state level, it's families. So we've talked ad nauseum about the fact that a severely autistic kid costs the family $1 to $5 million, present value. And I'm constantly telling grandparents, wait a minute, you have the 1 to 5 million. It is your business because you're going to be called on to pay this money. And you haven't spent your whole life working just to pay for vaccine injury. So this is a financial issue, but we are not connecting the dots between what's happening in the budget and the bills the legislature is passing that increase or support the poisoning. Now, you're at the heart of this because you're in the state legislators fighting about both financial freedom and food freedom, and you're trying to, for example, make it possible for us to get raw milk so we're healthy, and to stop pesticides indemnification, which is going to poison our us and our kids. So how can we get people to integrate these two things? Because if we keep passing legislation and supporting practices that poison us, we're going to bankrupt ourselves.
I don't know what the answer is to that. I think the answer is that, sometimes you just have to start walking and the path rises up to meet you. And so I think the first step is to really begin, as we've talked about, when I plug in my computer so it doesn't die, to begin forging those relationships. Because you're right, Catherine, things are going to begin to exponentially, I think, sort of begin to snowball. And I think we're sort of at this juncture where we do have the ability to stop some of the destruction that we see ahead. A lot of it may be too late, but I think even just simple things, when a state acts, it also allows the federal government to begin to act. Case in point, one of the bills we ran in Tennessee this year as Weston Price was removing the red 40 food dye from all of the public school lunches. We wanted to go after all the food dyes, but we realized after some conversations with senators that I had one senator tell me that he just didn't think we could do it. We should just go after red 40. And so that's what we did. And there was many states that introduced similar legislation. California in 2024 banned all food dyes from their school lunches. And I don't have it in my mind how many states were successful. I know at least 2 other states were successful, West Virginia, and I believe Virginia were successful in getting all food dyes out. And what we were having happen, though, is we were having the Bottling Association show up, the Beverage Association, and they were all saying, no, this is a federal issue. We don't want this. They were coming to us and lying and saying that, the feds didn't want the states to do it, that the states needed to just let the federal government handle it. And then thank goodness, Kennedy did put out a press release saying, no, I love what the states are doing. Please keep at it. Because when the states act, once again, it gives the federal government and the good people within the federal government the ability to say, hey, look, the states are doing it. We need to do it at a federal level. And so it can have a trickle up effect in helping to stop some of the poisoning.
So, because I called you, I had a sort of, and I called Carolyn too. I got very, very upset. Wonderful Doctor put out a tweet this week saying that it's either since the beginning of the new administration or the beginning of the year that 2.6 million people 2.6 million children have gotten an mRNA shot.
Mm.
And if you know the toxicity of the mRNA shots, if you know the danger and you know what the injury that can result from that, whether it's myocarditis or, all sorts of different kinds of adverse events or injury, what you know is you're not only talking about harming children, you're talking about bankrupting families. I'm
Yeah.
back to the money. And
Yeah.
at the same time, I was watching a video of the new Secretary of Treasury talking about how bringing manufacturing back will help American workers. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, another $10 an hour of wages is not going to help you if you have a $1 to $5 million expenditure for your severely autistic kids. I don't know if you know offhand the new statistics on autism, but it's absolutely phenomenal. Anyway, so I'm back to figuring out how we connect the dots. And I think one place where you can connect the dots is at the state legislators, because it's back to what you said. So many of these people, you have so many great people. I'm thinking now, Heather Scott in Northern Idaho, many of these people have been hero of the week on the Solari Report. But Heather Scott is one of those amazing people who talks to her constituents and works with all of her colleagues, and she just wants to do the right thing. And she's relentless. She just, she gets it done. And I think the people who can connect the dots are all those state legislators who really do listen and really do care. So I want to go back to encouraging everybody. So let's just talk a little bit before we close. What are the resources that you're listening to this and you say, okay, I'm ready to turn off my TV and go to work? How do I walk us again through the steps of how I get started and what resources are available to help people?
So on Solari, we have working successfully with state leaders. I think that's a great resource. It's a quick read. It kind of gives you an overview of, how to do it. But it's really, you just have to remember, these are normal people. These oftentimes you will be shocked at the lack of knowledge they may have in certain areas that you actually have a great deal of knowledge. And so I think just once again, determining who are you the constituent of, everywhere from, county commission to senator, and just setting up a time to meet them for coffee at Panera. Because right
And
now
they sometimes have town hall meetings.
yeah, and they sometimes do. And if they have an event in your district or a campaign party kickoff, begin to make those relationships now. That way, when a bad bill comes or a good bill that you want them to support, they already know who you are. They know you're not crazy. They trust you. They know you show up for their fundraisers. They know you show up for their events. And so it's just sort of, you have to kind of be your own lobbyist for what you want to have happen. And if you can start meeting even like with your county commissioners, your city council members, a lot of times those people go from the county commission to the state house. And so if you begin forming those relationships now, this is a long plan. We're not going to fix this year or in the next 5 years. This is an ongoing battle. And so it's not too late to start. Case in point, I never intended to be a lobbyist. It's kind of funny to me that I am even a lobbyist at this point. And so I had no training. I'm not necessarily smarter than anyone else that's listening to this. And so if I can do it, you can do it. I promise you.
Well, we think you're pretty smart, but
oh, thank you.
Anyway, so I also want to say I'm a great believer in sort of playing follow the leader until you get your feet wet and you sort of get an idea. And I know they're great Weston Price chapters. They're great health freedom groups. They're CHD chapters. They don't lobby, but they know a lot about what's going on with health freedom. At Solari, we have Connect software where subscribers can meet. We have meet and greets. And what you want to do is you want to get to know the people who've been doing this, and you can follow along with them. There are people who are, active, and you can jump on board and get involved and follow them until you get comfortable. So again, I also want to point out, we've got the this wonderful resource, What the States Can Do. If you want to fight the Bitcoin Ponzi scheme, you can access Bitcoin bailout too. There's a wealth of information at these websites. Weston Price also and CHD, wealth of information. So we encourage you to access it. So Elizabeth, thank you very much. We look forward to, we're going to record a great legislative briefing today that's open to the public, correct?
Yeah, if anybody has questions on how to, get involved in your state and just wants a little, any information I can give, I'm happy to give it. My email address is Elizabeth with a Z at solari.com. And if you email me before 1:45 today, I'll send you the link to the Zoom that we're about to have it to at 2 Eastern.
Great.
It is today. It's not tomorrow.
It is today.
It is today. Carolyn, any closing thoughts?
Oh, I always want to plug becoming a subscriber to Solari, because there are a lot of things that are available to subscribers, like bringing in your own legislator for one of these legislative briefings that aren't available to the general public. But there's a whole lot on our website that is available to the general public. But Elizabeth, it's been a real pleasure to work with you, and I look forward to continuing our relationship.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, as Polly would say, stand firm and pray big. Thank you for joining us on the Financial Rebellion.
And never settle.
Never settle. That's right. Never settle. And have a wonderful, wonderful week. Carolyn and I and Polly will be back with you next week on Financial Rebellion.
Okay, we are live. So can you tell us who you are?
My name is Carrie. This is my husband, Matt.
Can you speak a tiny bit louder?
Yeah.
You're Carrie and you're Matt.
Yes.
And this
This
is
is Cash. He's our
Cash.
youngest.
He's your youngest, okay. And has Cash had any vaccines?
Cash has not had any vaccines.
None at all.
None at all.
How old is he?
He's 4.
Okay. All right, let's
Can
go
you say
through.
hi?
You don't have to.
Cash just woke up from a nap, so he's
Yes, we all know what that's like. Okay, let's talk about your son Mason.
Yeah. So our son Mason,
Was he your first child?
he was not. He was our second child.
Second child.
Mason was born January 25th, 2016. He was healthy, happy, a good, happy baby. And we did what every good parent does, and we vaccinated him because the doctor told us to. Sorry,
It's
life,
okay,
life of a mom.
I totally understand. And what did he get?
So Mason received. We delayed. We didn't do it at the hospital because I was unsure, and that intuition thing, I think, is probably the biggest thing that I wish I'd done differently. I knew from day one that we shouldn't do it, and I let doctors talk me into it. There's actually a whole case, it's called Making the Case for Vaccine Hesitant Parents, and it's a course that doctors take, I think through Mayo or Johns Hopkins, or one of them. I actually have the PDF that doctors see printed out, and I've read it, and it's an entire course the doctors take on how to manipulate parents into vaccinating their babies, with catchphrases.
Do you remember
scripting.
some of them? What do they say?
They're safer to get it. They're better off to get it. These diseases are horrible childhood diseases, and you're better to have these vaccines than better safe than sorry. Like all those things that you go into the doctor's office and they tell you, and so you're scared. They scare you. They intimidate you into getting these. And even though, it's crazy looking back now. I look back through his medical records, and at every single visit, it literally puts on there, Mom was hesitant about vaccines. Mom was hesitant about vaccines at every visit. And I didn't trust myself. I didn't didn't listen to the voice inside me where God was saying, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And I let a doctor who didn't know us and didn't know our baby, I let him make the decisions for me. And I let him bully me, and as a result, we have one less boy to, be at our house today.
So when did he get his first vaccine?
His first vaccine was, I believe he was a 2/2 of 2016. So he was born 1/25 of 2016. So it was like a week or two later. And that was the hepatitis vaccine, because I remember at the hospital telling them, he doesn't need that because we don't have hepatitis, and we're not drug addicts, and we're not sexually active in the community, so there wasn't a need for it. And so we didn't do it at the hospital, and then we got to the doctor's office, and man, he laid it on, and just, you need to do this. At that point was right when they were starting to tell parents that if you didn't vaccinate your kids, you couldn't come into the clinics. That was when pediatricians were just starting to push people out for not getting them. I didn't know then. I mean, what I know now is that, they receive compensation from the insurance companies for having a quota of parents that have patients that are vaccinated within their clinics.
So at 1 week old, he had Hep B.
I'm sorry?
At 1 week old, he had Hep B.
At 1 week old, he had the Hep B, and we progressed on the normal schedule. At 3/23, he would have been 2 months old, and we did the 2-month-old round.
Which was what?
That was the DTaP. They did another Hep B, a Hib, and an IPV. I believe that's the polio one. And Prevnar 13.
My God, that child had a horrific
Rotavirus.
amount.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. The two fire trucks. A triangle, a circle, and a square. Yes.
That was at 2 months old.
That was at 2 months old. Yes. So he. And at that point he was still developing fine. He, when you'd put him on his belly, he would still sit up. I call it like the baby turtle, where they put their chest up and they'd kind of look around. He was still able to do that, and after the 2-month vaccinations, he lost that ability. He developed a condition called hypotonia, which is also called floppy baby syndrome. It's listed as a reaction on the vaccine inserts, and it's basically where his head would just flop like this all the time, and he couldn't hold it up anymore. And I remember going to the doctor's office and saying, this doesn't seem right. He could hold his head up. He can't hold his head up anymore. And the doctor said, well, he has torticollis. And, I'm not a doctor. I'm not versed in all of these things. And I said, okay. And he said, well, let's sign him up for physical therapy. And
At 2 months old?
2 months old. The wait list in our area for physical therapy was about 2 months to get in. It took us quite a while to get in, and during that time his 4-month round of shots came up, and he had another round.
So the doctor even though we've got issues,
Yeah.
the doctor still thought it was a good idea to go ahead and give him some more. And what did he get?
At 4 months old, he got another round of the DTaP, another Hib, another IPV, another Prevnar 13, and another rotavirus. And 5 days later, he died. And in his autopsy, the coroner said that there was no issues with the sterniocoidoid mastoid in his neck, which is the muscle that's responsible for torticollis. So if he had had torticollis, whether you're living or not living, that muscle is still deformed. So if he had had torticollis, in the autopsy it would have shown up, but it wasn't there, which they said was further proof that it was probably the hypotonia and not torticollis.
The pediatrician who gave these shots to your son, where is that person? Is he still practicing?
He's still practicing. I went back to him. I showed him the autopsy report. I took him the VAERS report, or the VAERS paperwork, and said, you know, even if you don't think that the vaccine caused this, you still have an obligation under the law to report it. You still have to report everything that's within this realm as a potential side effect. And he said he wouldn't do it.
He wouldn't.
Refused. He had been our family doctor for 10 years. He didn't even come to the funeral.
That is absolutely disgusting.
Yeah.
You guys, I'm really sorry this happened to you. We put him on the bus. Look, oops, look. There he is. He's on the bus already.
We did move forward with a vaccine court case.
So you reported it yourself?
We did, yeah. We self-reported it to VAERS, and we decided to go ahead and hire an attorney and take it to the vaccine court. We were making some headway there until the court case that ours was, the case that we were using as precedent for our case was reversed by our own government. So I don't know, I mean, obviously you guys are familiar with the vaccine court, but you can't sue the pharmaceutical companies. They're exempt from any kind of legal ramifications for faulty products or injuries that they cause to anybody. And so you basically file this vaccine report to, it's a court of special masters. And within that court of special masters, they review your case and review it against other cases, which is the precedent. And the family that our precedent was, the case that our precedent was being stated on, had actually gone to court. I mean, almost word for word, the exact same story as our little boy. He had had the same vaccinations, died in the same time frame. Like everything was almost, you know, it's like copy and print from what we went through. And they won, and it was a huge victory for the court, or for the family. And then they reversed it. They appealed their own decisions. The court revealed their own.
It's unbelievable.
Reversed their own. Sorry, I wish I could be more eloquent.
You are. You're telling a very difficult story, and we're really grateful. Is there anything else you want to add to the story?
I think. Sorry, 4 is fun. I wish that more people knew. I wish that that for moms, trust yourself.
Yeah.
Trust your instinct. These are your babies. They're yours. They're not the doctors. They're not our governments. They're not the school districts. They're your babies. And, you know, it's our responsibility to keep them safe. You know, everything within me said, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And I let somebody else who gets to go home to his kids, he gets to go home and hug his babies. And I get to go to a cemetery to see mine.
I'm sorry.
And, you know, it's just one of those where, you know, you can't allow them to bully you. You have to go in and be firm. You have to know that, you know, what's right in your heart. And, sorry, I bet he's going to go home here more. You have to trust yourself. I wish that somebody had just told me, trust yourself.
Yeah.
But nobody did. I didn't have a single person who spoke up and said, hey, research this, look into this. I think, like, for me, that would have been massive if just one person had said, hey, just do a little bit of research, even if you still come to the same conclusion. At the end of the day, I would have known that I had at least known both sides of the story instead of not knowing, not having the information. It's just, ignorance is not bliss.
Thank you so much, both of you, for telling your story. We really appreciate it. So sorry for what happened to Mason.
Autism destroys families, and more importantly, it destroys our greatest resource, which are our children.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
pledged to find out what is driving the country's rise in autism.
Compiling medical records from a number of databases. He'll direct resources to study environmental factors, exposures, and external factors.
Scientific progress on this has been slow because scientists are frankly scared to ask the question.
Genes don't cause epidemics. You need an environmental toxin, and we're going to look at all the potential culprits.
With no a priori thumb on the scale, you can't look at that.
Yeah. I'm very grateful to the Secretary for finally saying from an important public platform that this is an epidemic and we need to find the causes and we need to stop it.
Other issues CHC has been pushing for years are finally gaining mainstream traction.
Today we're announcing we are removing industry members, pharma members from FDA advisory committees.
We're seeing reports that you're considering removing the COVID vaccine as a mandatory shot for children.
The recommendation for children was always dubious. The vaccine itself does have profound risk of myocarditis, pericarditis, even strokes.
Very, 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 very few people are still taking these things. In that sense, the mRNA vaccines for COVID in the marketplace are effectively dead.
We are working together to change the federal fluoride recommendations, and we're looking at the science now. There's a direct inverse correlation between fluoride exposure and low IQ in children.
Health officials announced plans to phase out 8 artificial dyes from our food supply.
The FDA is effectively removing all petroleum-based food dyes from the U.S. food supply.
We don't have a surveillance system that actually works, and that is a crime. And we will do that right away. And I understand the perverse incentives that need to be changed right away.
When there's a political will to answer a question like this, it will happen.
We're going to change things for real.